have with us Congressman Jim Clyburn, representing South Carolina's 6th Congressional District in the U.S. House of Representatives, where he previously served as Majority Whip. A more than 30-year congressional veteran, he has been influential and effective legislative leader and an unwavering voice for civil rights. Born in Sumter, South Carolina during the Jim Crow era, he has been awarded the NAACP's highest honor, the Springard Medal, the Lyndon Baines Johnson Foundation's Liberty and Justice for All Award, and the Harry S. Truman Foundation's Good Neighbor Award. And he holds honorary degrees from 40 colleges and universities. He'll be joined tonight in conversation with Congressman Ro Khanna, who represents California's 17th Congressional District. Some of you may be familiar with that district. He serves on the House Armed Services Committee as ranking member of the Subcommittee on Cyber, Innovative Technologies, and Information Systems. He's a member of the Select Committee on the Strategic Competition between the United States and the Chinese Communist Party, and on the Oversight and Accountability Committee, where he previously chaired the Environmental Subcommittee. So we're going to have a conversation tonight about Congressman Clyburn's amazing book, Learn the Lessons of History. We'll have a QR code put up here on the screen behind me if you'd like to scan that code and pose any questions. We have wonderful Stanford undergraduates who will be helping us with that as well from Stanford Votes. And then after the conversation, after about 45 minutes, we'll turn then to those questions, all right? So thank you again for coming, and please help me to welcome Congressman Clyburn and Congressman Clyburn.
Thank you so much, and thank you for your incredible leadership, for giving Mr. Clyburn and me a tour of the Martin Luther King Center here. Really a incredible honor to have Dr. King's papers here, and your work with the students is incredible. Let's give him a round of applause for hosting this. We've got a full house, even with the rain. Doesn't surprise me. I appreciate it in the introductions that you didn't do a contrast. I have 0 honorary degrees. But it is such an honor to have Mr. Clyburn here. And I don't say this lightly. He is a figure of American history. And it's not just because he has honorary degrees. It's not just because he has the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the Ford's Gold Medal. Every time in Washington, there's some other organization honoring him. But it's a deserved honor for 2 reasons. One, when we were discussing this with students, if you look at people who were involved in the civil rights movement, whether it was John Lewis or Dr. King or Ralph Abernathy or Fannie Lou Hamer, Mr. Clyburn is the one person who has achieved the highest office in the United States of America coming out of the civil rights. That is an incredible feat and an incredible part of our history, and something that is just such an honor to be here with him. The second thing, which I often say, is I would not be born in the United States if it weren't for people like Mr. Clyburn. Because he went to jail, because he was part of SNCC, because he fought for civil rights, it led to the Immigration Reform Act of 1965 that allowed my parents to come to the United States of America. And so I feel a personal debt, a historical debt to people like Mr. Clyburn. He's written an incredible book. He's gracious enough to be willing to sign any of the books afterwards. Now, I mention this because there are a lot of politicians whose signatures I would not hear about. His is one that I treasure. I have a signed copy of his book in my office, and it's really an honor. Mr. Clyburn, let's start out the conversation with this. Usually when people write books, or politicians, they write about themselves. You easily could have done that, given all you've done in your life, yet you chose not really to write about yourself in this book, but about 8 members of Congress, Black members of Congress in South Carolina who came before you. Why did you make that?
Well, let me begin by thanking all of you for being here this evening. Thank you so much for welcoming me in such a warm way in sunny California. Thank you very much. And thank you, Ro, for your friendship over the years. So in the Congress, those of you who are looking on our proceedings, you know we often refer to each other as my good friend, when most times we don't mean it. I do mean it when I say Ro is my good friend. We have developed a very close working, political, and personal friendship. And I have 3 daughters, and all 3 of them seem to feel that I have to keep them abreast with how their friend, Ro Khanna, is doing. So thank you so much. Yes. This book, The First 8, is really my 3rd book. And this book came into being because I keep the pictures of these 8 people on the wall in my office. And I've kept those pictures there for years. And often people would ask me about them, and I would take time to explain who these people were. During one of those explanations, a lady very emotionally exclaimed, "My Lord, I thought you were the first African American to represent South Carolina in the United States Congress." And I kind of playfully said, "Oh no, before I was first, there were 8." Then I said to my staff later that day, my next book is going to be about these 8 people because I think they need to be introduced to the American public. Well, started out to write the book, and about 60, 70% into the book, the election 2020 occurred. And then one night, watching television, there were these people banging on those windows up there in Michigan, trying to get into the election headquarters, trying to set up or disrupt the count. Same thing was going on in Pennsylvania, and all of us heard that telephone call down to Georgia. Find me 11,780 votes, trying to change the outcome of the election because the effort was to get this election thrown into the House of Representatives. You don't get a majority of the Electoral College vote, the election goes into the House of Representatives. And I said to myself, this book has got to be different from what I had planned. Rather than just introduce these 8 people to the American public, I need to introduce their efforts. What happened? Why there is 95 years between number 8 on this list and yours truly, number 9. And so I changed the direction of the book, talked to the publisher, told them what I thought needed to be done, and they agreed with me, gave me a new person to work with. Because the guy I was working with was academic. This book has got to approach this issue from politics of that time, politics of today, and show the contrast and similarities. So the book then became what I call in the epilogue, cautionary tale. 3 most significant things that happened during this period were each decided by a single vote. A lot of people think all of the Reconstruction came to an end by some sweeping set of circumstances, or that Jim Crow became the law of the land. by some wave over the country. Not so. Reconstruction came to an end by a vote of 8-7. Jim Crow became the law of the land by a vote of 185-184. That's what this book is all about. Why that happened, how that happened, who was involved, why. We have to be very careful that we don't relive that. That's what this book is about.
No, it's wonderful. I actually didn't know the history until I read your book, that it was that one vote that shaped all of this. It reminds you of how historically contingent things were. Like if Comey had not leaked what he did 3-4 days before the election, we may not have had all of the history we've had since that. I do want to recognize Miss Virginia, who came with Mr. Clyburn. I see you in the back, very modest, but we're so honored that you came here. I know Mr. Clyburn promised warm weather and sun. I'm hoping we'll still see some of that, but thank you for that. Mr. Clyburn, Charles Dickens said in Their Heart of Hearts, every parent has a favorite child. And after reading this, it seemed to me you had a favorite, those 8 Congress people. I could be, presuming it, but it seemed you had a soft spot or a great admiration for Robert Smalls. And I knew his story about how he had escaped as a slave and commandeered the ship, but I never knew that he had met Abraham Lincoln. Maybe you could share a bit of his story and his meeting with Lincoln and how that arguably changed the entire trajectory of the Civil War.
Absolutely. Robert Smalls, most people learn early in school, was this guy born enslaved, and he escaped from slavery by commandeering a ship, the Planter, and sailing that ship out of the Charleston Harbor, delivering it to the Union forces, and being granted his freedom. Most people do not know that there was much, much, much more to Robert Smalls than that. Imagine, I called him in the book the most consequential South Carolinian who ever lived. Those of you who studied history or maybe from the South, you say, oh no, John C. Calhoun. Some of you might even say Strom Thurmond. Well, none of them. Robert Smalls, born enslaved, was sent to Charleston from Beaufort, where he was born, to work on the waterfront. And he was to send all of his earnings back to his master, John McKee, but for $1. He was allowed to keep $1 every payday. All the other money went back to John McKee. Now, while working on this ship, they recognized some leadership qualities in Smalls. And Smalls kind of became the foreman of those enslaved people working on the ship. But every week, every Friday, the 3 white guys who ran the ship would go into Charleston on Friday evening and would not show up at the ship again till Saturday afternoon. But one day, while they were gone, Smalls started prancing around the ship playfully, mimicking the captain of the ship. And he picked up the captain's hat, flopped it on his head, and started mimicking captain's order. One of his buddies said to him, Smalls, when you put that cap on, you look exactly like that. Planted an idea in Smalls. Smalls started planning his escape. started studying the currents, harbor, started listening to the whistles of the ship. He learned what it took to get past the central points. Long whistle, short whistle, whatever the sequence may have been, he learned all of that. Started hatching an idea. He brought half a dozen of his buddies in on the plan, his wife and daughter, and he thought the time Friday evening, they all went into town. They put their plan into action. Small took that ship along with his wife and daughter. He had smuggled onto the ship, and his buddies. They sailed that ship out of the Charleston Harbor through 5 central points, last one being Fort Sumter, and delivered that ship to the Union soldiers. Once they got out from Fort Sumter, his wife had brought along a white sheet, bed sheet, turned it into a flag of surrender, approached the Union forces, delivered that ship. He explained how apprehensive he was because he was not sure that the Union forces, but because a lot of stuff was going on back then, that they may or may not have recognized the flag of surrender. But in this instance, they did. But were shocked to find out when they boarded the ship, they were all contraband. Because in that period, the enslaved, even when freed, were contraband. And they were given their freedom and awarded. Smalls got $1,500. The others got some lesser amount, but they got a financial reward. And Smalls was kept on the ship to help navigate the ship through battle. He fought, he navigated in 17 battles. And there was one particular battle that made him, that I call, most consequential South Carolinian who ever lived. One day when that ship was going from Port Royal down near Hilton Head over to Morris Island. As you can imagine, a big reward was being offered for Small. $6,000 had been placed on his head. And of course, they wanted that ship back. So everybody was trying to get that $6,000 and the ship. Well, one day the ship was spotted. The Confederates opened fire. And the fight was so fierce. The captain of the ship ordered Smalls to beach the ship and give up. Smalls knew what his fortune was going to be. And using some very colorful language, he says, ain't giving up the ship. He locked the captain up in the coal bin, took over the ship, won the battle, and delivered the ship safely back to port. And when the authorities found out what happened, they fired the captain and made Smalls captain of the ship. That changed the course of this war. And something else happened. Smalls, when the ship was first taken out of the port, it was in the month of May, 1862. Smalls was sent to Washington in August that year by General Saxon because the war was being lost. Saxon knew that he did not have the manpower to win the war. And all of you have studied that Frederick Douglass was encouraging Abraham Lincoln, who was his buddy, to allow blacks to fight in the Civil War. And some people even give Douglass credit for having convinced Lincoln to do that. Not true. When Saxon felt that they would not win without it, he figured, because Smalls had become such a hero for everybody, people all over, up in Philadelphia, up in New York, they were all trying to get Smalls to move there. You are now a free man, come up here and live. Smalls did not do that. He stayed in the South. Well, he sent Smalls to Washington. Smalls met with Abraham Lincoln. August, think of it. In February, we were enslaved. March, enslaved. In August, he was sitting down with the President of the United States. And he made the case on behalf of Saxon to Lincoln. Lincoln agreed to let him recruit at the time 5,000 freedmen into the battle. It grew over time to 180,000. 180,000 freedmen fought in the Civil War. 40,000 of them were killed during the war. But Lincoln made a statement, you'll find it, I believe it's on page 17 of the book. Abraham Lincoln said, but for the freedmen, war would have been lost. So who in South Carolina's history has ever had that kind of consequence? There are none that I've been able to find. That's why Smalls is my favorite.
Well, you say Robert Smalls is the most consequential South Carolinian. I have a pretty good candidate for the number 2 most consequential South Carolinian. And one of the reasons is there was a 95-year gap between a Black American being elected to Congress and you. And this surprises a lot of people because they think, okay, we understand 60 years, 70 years, but after 1965, after the Voting Rights Act, why do we not get a member of Congress from South Carolina who's African American in the 70s? Why do we not get one in the 80s? Why does it take until 1992? Explain that 95-year gap, the reasons for it, and what allowed you ultimately to triumph.
Well, I mentioned that after the Civil War, after the 1876 presidential election, the Electoral College vote is one vote. Well, Jim Crow became the law of the land. As you can imagine, states changed their constitution. And states changed their voting procedure. I use the term a lot that when Hayes made this deal, get the votes that he needed to be president, he became president by a vote of 185.84. Now, happened. He took all of the troops out of the South and left the Negro up to the creative devices of Southern legislatures and all kinds of things. Laws were put on the book, all kinds of practices have, and you've heard the stories. A lot of people think this stuff is made up. I mean, in my lifetime, even in your lifetime, there were questions being asked of people trying to register to vote. Questions like, how many bubbles were in a bar of soap? How many jelly beans are in that jar? You don't give the right number of bubbles in the bar of soap, you don't get to register to vote. Some were not quite as ridiculous. I don't know. I have not found any record of them ever doing anything like that in South Carolina. I'm gonna tell you what they did do in South Carolina. They created these majority runoff requirements. 3 people running for office, and if you don't get 50% plus 1 of the vote, you don't get the nomination. Read the history of this. Right, it started in Georgia, the majority runoff requirement, and on the floor of the legislature, they were explaining to people, we are doing this because if 3 people run for office, 2 white and 1 black, it could very well be that the 2 white people will split the vote, and the 1 black person will get elected. And so these things were done so that if that were to occur, you're going to have to rerun, and this 1 black person would then have to run against this 1 white person, and then it would be required to get 50% plus 1. So they racialized all the elections. I'll tell you the scheme they had in South Carolina. When I first ran for office back in 1970, we had something called the full slate law. And the full slate law was not what most people think. For instance, and this is the fact, Charleston had 11 seats. I was in Charleston County. In the legislature, they were allocated 11 seats in the state legislature because of its population. The law in South Carolina at the time that anybody that went to vote would have to vote for 11 people. So if 11 people are running, 10 white, 1 black, you says, well, only know this black guy. I'm gonna vote for the black guy. I don't know any of the white people. I'm gonna vote for my church member. Your vote would not count. In order for your 1 vote to count me, you would have to vote for 10 other people. You have to vote the full slate. And that worked, as you can imagine, keep any black person from getting elected unless enough white people would vote for it. And that was the law. These kinds of schemes were used all the way down, and it was a 65 Voting Rights Act that outlawed those schemes. And so these creative devices were used all over the South. That's how they kept black people out of office. And that lasted. After 1965, they came up with at-large elections, which meant that no single-member district. So when you couldn't have, like they called, numbered posts, everybody run at large, but each one of these posts would be numbered. So it would set you up to have to vote for the number. You say if there are 4 senators, you vote for 1, nope. got to pick which one of the four. Dawson's got it. Connor's got 4 senators. Number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4. So you don't vote for 4, you vote for them by numbers. These were some very creative devices that worked very effectively, and they kept Black people out of office until 1965 voting rights.
I appreciate you're going through that history. One of the things that struck me in the book is this constant tension in our nation between forward progress and then regression. And it certainly seems so applicable to this moment. You write about Reconstruction with so much hope and promise that it had for realigning the nation and the South along the lines of equality and dignity for everyone. And then you talk about this redemption movement that comes about, redeem the South to what it used to be. A familiar sense of nostalgia that we hear today, get back to where it was as ultimately succeeding in quashing Reconstruction. What are the lessons that you take from that tension more broadly in the American story, and how do you think they apply to the moment we're in today?
Well, I think that the first thing we have to really come to grips with is for people to understand the importance of one vote. Reconstruction could come to an end by a vote 8-7. Jim Crow becomes a law by a vote 185 to 184. Andrew Johnson, who tried to undo everything that Abraham Lincoln had done, was impeached, and the Senate failed to convict him by one vote. These 3 consequential things, each determined by one vote. And so what you have to do is really come to grips with the fact that one vote is so important. It has determined very consequential things in our society hold importance. That's the first thing. Second thing I think has to be understood that anything that has happened before can happen again. Many times you've heard 6 is called the second Reconstruction. The only way you can have a second Reconstruction is for the first one to come to an end. And so if the first Reconstruction comes to an end, the second Reconstruction could come to an end. And so when you hear these articulations about making America great again, then you got to ask, when was America great before? When do you perceive America to have been great before? What were those conditions that existed that caused you to classify that period of time as a period of greatness in America? I hear one of the people that I studied when I was a student, a guy named Alexis de Tocqueville. Now, I'm sure on this campus, I said about de Tocqueville. Tocqueville wrote a 2-volume work called Democracy in America. And in one of those books, you're going to find this statement. America's greatness is not that she is more enlightened than any other nation, but rather because she has always been able to repair her faults. Think about that. That's what makes America great. On to the token. I hear the Tocqueville's notion. You're not a perfect country, but we are great because when we see these faults, we do things that are necessary to repair. Always repair the faults. That's what Abraham Lincoln was doing with the Emancipation Proclamation. That's what the Congress was doing. The 1964 Civil Rights Act and the 1965 Voting Rights Act, repairing faults that existed in the nation. So if you are trying to return to some condition, and the reason I call you deem the South, is because these people were trying to move the South back to a pre-Civil War society. Antebellum, I think, is the funny name we put on it. But all it meant was, let's go back to pre-Civil War day. Now, there are a lot of people will see that as restoring America's greatness. That's your mindset. So I think that what we have to do when we look at the country is look at where we are as a country, where we think the country needs to be, and what can we do to get there? And how do we create the climate within which we can get there? And what I attempt to do with this book is to say, because anything that's happened before can happen again, it doesn't mean that the result has to be the same as it was before. I think it was the Spanish philosopher George Santayana said, if we fail to learn the lessons of history, we're bound to repeat them. So that's the whole thing. Have we learned history's lessons? So that's the broad thing I think we have to do. Realize the quality or the effectiveness of vote. Realize that we are living in a democracy that is not perfect. Realize that our country has faults that need to be repaired, and really create a climate within which we can.
Thank you for that. Well, we don't have, you now say that usually our caucus meetings are a mess. Everyone is more interested in getting their breakfast and food and talking to each other. And then when Mr. Clyburn gets up and speaks, there's pin drop silence. It's one of the few people who's listened to intently by everyone in our House Democratic Caucus. We don't share the same amount of honorary degrees, but we do have one thing in common. I lost twice before I won for Congress, and I didn't realize that you lost 3 times before you won in Congress. You have a wonderful line in the book. You say, life is not baseball. It's not 3 strikes, you're out. What would your message be to some of the young folks who are watching on live stream or here who are discouraged by the political environment, who in candor have not faced the struggles you faced? I mean, of going to jail and growing up in segregation, but do feel the sense of, is it worth it? Can there really be change? Should I really try? Can I win? There's all this money in politics. Can I even overcome that? Why should I get involved? Maybe feel defeated. What can you tell from your life experience, your losses, your struggles to them about entering politics or public service?
Well, first of all, you did say I often, like, that is my constant commencement address. Is 3 strikes and you're out as a baseball rule. And nobody should live their lives by baseball rules. That to me is a constant. But I think that my dad used to say all the time, son, darkest point of the night is that moment just before dawn. And I live by that. And no matter how bleak or dark it may seem, it seems to me that we must keep in mind that this may be that moment for sons. And I would tell any young person to keep that in mind. And I often say, every single person in here has had this admonition said to them: if at first you don't succeed, try and try again. They didn't say try one more time, two more times. No numerical limit is put on how many times you should try. And so I say to young people all the time, you never give up. John Lewis, you heard him. He said that to you. Never give up, never give out. The whole thing was always that. John and I, though I never internalized nonviolence the way he did, practice it. We met as 19-year-old college students. We stayed very close throughout the years. In fact, I spoke with John night before he passed away, just a few hours before he passed away. He was not talk back. We used to talk about this all the time. What we were thinking about when we were sitting in those jails, did we think would ever be sitting here in Congress together? No, we didn't think it would. Someone asked me yesterday in Sacramento, was I scared? I don't ever remember being scared. I mean, not a single time that I sat in the jail that I ever remember being afraid. I do remember asking myself questions about why we were there. Would we succeed? How long it would take? A lot of times, when we gonna get out of jail? Never scared. And so I think that the one thing I tell young people all the time, do not allow fear to conquer. So much of what you hear, a lot of people today, and what you see is the attempts to instill fear. They want you to be afraid to participate in the process, afraid to go here. This whole thing is about fear. So you just can't allow fear to conquer. So that's most of what I'd say. I think it's important for us to know. John Lewis, he walked across that Edmund Pettus Bridge, looking down at those 200 law enforcement people with dogs waiting for them. John, I don't think John was afraid. He knew what was coming, but he also knew what he had to do. I don't think those people in Minnesota that we've been seeing, those people, it was too cold out there for them to get. You operate in sub-zero weather like that, you can't be afraid. You're trying to stay warm.
I'll ask one more question because we have so many questions from the audience. Many people know you for helping President Biden get elected. Many of people know the pivotal role you played, and someone we're very proud of in California, Vice President Harris being the first African-American woman on a ticket and being on that ticket. But they may not realize the role you played in Barack Obama winning initially, when a lot of the African-American leadership actually was with Hillary Clinton, not for out of any malice or reason against Obama, just in terms of the odds. And you took a very early decision to be with President Obama. I knew that because I was in his administration. people appreciated that. When I was in his administration, I was young, in my early 30s, I said, okay, here we go. We're going to a multiracial democracy. We're going to have women, we're going to have Latino presidents, Asian American presidents. It's going to be a ride towards seeing a multiracial democracy. I would not have guessed that we'd be in Congress where we're actually talking about repealing parts of the Voting Rights Act. In a moment of more hope, do you think we get to Douglas's vision of a composite nation, King's vision, the multiracial democracy, the things Obama was talking about? And how hard do you think it's going to be for us to get there?
Well, it's going to be, nothing's going to be easy. One thing that we have to remember, my not so humble opinion, this country, politics in this country moves like a pendulum. It goes right, goes back left, stops out at some point and goes. And the extent to which it moves right or left depends upon intervention of the vote. That's what stops too far right or too far left, whether or not voters intervene. But was always remember, when the pendulum is going from left to right, it passes through the center. When it's going from right to left, it passes through the center. So the notion is that the pendulum hangs out in the center, center left, center right, much more often than it does right or left. And if we wish, no matter how, now I don't have anything against prayer. Born and raised in the apostle. My dad used to tell me all the time, you pray for good health and strength. Then you get up off your knees and go to work. So we can pray for peace and prosperity. We can pray for good outcomes. But we got to work. It's going to be hard. It's always hard. Most things that are worth having are pretty hard to achieve. And so it ain't going to be easy, but I do believe that it's incumbent upon us to do, and I also say the things that our children and grandchildren benefit. If we don't do what needs to be done, I hate to think of us leaving to our children the kind of country they will inherit. We fail to hold on to this democracy, if we fail to instill in this democracy the dignity and respect that everybody is deserving of, this is not going to be worth people. And they ain't going to feel good about us if we allow that to happen. That's just the way it is. It's going to be hard. You're at that point. But my late wife used to insist that I do billboards in every election. She had a thing. She was all that enamored with TV ads. So I developed billboards that I use. And it simply says, making America's greatness accessible and affordable. That self-care, education, energy, whatever these things are. The question ought to be, is it accessible to everybody? Is it affordable by everybody? That, not is it easy for everybody?
We're now going to go to the audience questions, and then Mr. Clyburn, after that, has graciously agreed to sign some books. Go ahead.
Thank you both. We have a number of folks who have on their mind the recent passing of Reverend Jesse Jackson. So would love to hear for either one of you or both of you any reflections on his passing and his meaning to American politics and American history.
Jesse and I first met, this may surprise a lot of you. We were students at rival high schools. He went to Sterling High School in Greenville. I went to Mather Academy in Camden, and we played football against each other. I was on the team. Jesse played. He was an outstanding quarterback in high school, and went off to college. He ended up at North Carolina A&T. I went to South Carolina State, and our schools were intense rivals. So we allowed that rivalry that we developed. We matured into adulthood, become a fast friendship that we kept. In fact, I spoke with his son, Jonathan, who's now serving in the Congress, just before we build it today. Jesse made contributions to this country that I don't think a lot of people will ever really focus on. And let me give you one of them, which I think is very critical. And Jesse mounted this campaign back in 1984, 1988. We used to have in these primaries these winner-take-all elections. You could carry a state by 1 percentage point, but you get 100% of the delegates. The proportional delegate selection that made it possible for Barack Obama to get elected president all grew out of actions that started after the 1972 presidential election and led into 1984, 1988 elections. Jesse Jackson, proportional delegate representation is what made it possible for Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama to be nominated presidents of the United States. Jesse, in the forefront of all of that, very few people was good at speech making as Jesse was. He became a symbol of all that we wanted this country to be. So he transitioning on yesterday did that those of us who are left would do well to follow.
I would just say that as a 12-year-old Indian American of Hindu faith, growing up in a middle-class family and neighborhood, I remember very vividly watching Reverend Jackson's 1988 speech and how he spoke to the outside, how he spoke to people who were not traditionally showcased in American society or American politics, and is talking about keeping hope alive and believing in yourself, even if others may discount you. Never did I think back then that I would be in Congress or be best friends with his son in Congress, Jonathan Jackson, and we just spoke to Jonathan. But I would say that his opening up the horizon of what was possible, changed American politics, made not just President Obama possible, but so many doors open for people. And I think his son Jonathan is going to take that legacy to even further heights with his time in Congress.
You mentioned the Reconstruction, that it was passed a very small margin. Are there any other lessons you think we can learn from Reconstruction to help us move towards a more just society?
Well, we here at the Stanford Law School is interested, and we were talking to a few students, earlier, one of whom, he brought up the fact that two big laws, 1866 Civil Rights Act that was passed during Reconstruction. Reconstruction. Now, I'll tell you this about this book. I've always been a stickler for history, and a lot of people say that I'm the first African American to be elected to Congress from South Carolina since Reconstruction. I tell them that's not true, because Reconstruction only lasted for about 13 years. Reconstruction came to an end with those troops coming out of the South in 1877. Now, Robert Smalls was elected to Congress after Reconstruction. He was elected one time before. He was out of Congress. Then he was elected after Reconstruction. Thomas Miller, elected after Reconstruction. George Washington Murray. All of them were elected after Reconstruction. So the 1866 Civil Rights Act, still on the books today. And most lawyers, when they go to court on a civil rights issue, that act is used more than any other. Not the 64 Civil Rights Act, the 1866, which was passed by the people in this book. It is still there today. You hear them call Section 1983. That is a section of the 1866 Civil Rights Act. So there are a lot of things that happened on the 13th Amendment. Now, slaves were freed with the Emancipation Proclamation. But the Emancipation Proclamation was an executive order, not a law. Executive order signed by the President of the United States. What does that mean? That means at the end of that president's term, that executive order goes away. So we had to pass the 13th Amendment in order for slaves to be free. So the enslaved were freed by the 13th Amendment. They were set free by Emancipation Proclamation. But they would have been back into slavery if you had to wait on the Congress to pass it, the law back then. So we had to get the 13th Amendment, put it in the Constitution. And then the 14th Amendment gave them equal protection of law. And then the 15th Amendment gave the formerly enslaved the right to vote. Those three things. All of that grew out of Reconstruction.
What do you think is some of the biggest challenges for future business and political leaders of color?
Well, the challenges for people of color are greater than the challenge for everybody when it comes to going into business and the corporations that sort. The challenges for the whole country be living out the true meaning of this Constitution that I just referred to. That is, that's not a challenge that's a burden of Black people. That's a challenge that's a burden for the country. And I think that when you look at this whole notion about America first, you got to be very, very careful of the world in which we live. This world with which we live is 2/3 people of color. So we have to be very, very careful about that. So if that becomes the definer for the future of the world, that's not a good place for the United States of America to be. Not best learn to get along with all the other people in the world. You don't want skin color to define. Everybody's not like Thomas Miller. Ro didn't ask me about him, but one of the people in this in his eight, a guy named Thomas E. Miller. He was number 7, if you go chronologically. Thomas Miller was not African American by birth. He became African American by choice. It's true. Miller was born out of wedlock. Jasper County near Hilton Head. And his parent, or his mother, put him up for adoption. Thomas E. Miller was Thomas Hayward's grandson. Thomas Hayward was one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. And when he was put up for adoption, an African-American family adopted him. And they moved to Charleston. He ended up making the decision after going to Lincoln University and HBCU in Pennsylvania. He went back to Charleston to live, went to the University of South Carolina Law School. South Carolina had another great thing, to his credit, that is, it was the only state in the South whose university was integrated. Not till after all of this foolishness started that they closed the school and reopened it right on. I think that's one of the interesting things about this book. And if you look on page 229 of the book, when y'all get it, before you read the book, look on page 229, read that tombstone. It'll be Miller's admission that he was not black.
Question from a South Carolina native here. What role do you think progressive historians and activists have had on the state?
On the state of South Carolina?
Yes, sir.
Very significant. You know, all these people, by today's definition, would be a progressive. Jesse Jackson, South Carolina native, he would be progressive. You know, sometimes people ask me, are you progressive? People call you moderate. Well, I said, well, my father, very conservative guy, but he was a minister. And when he asked for offerings on Sunday, he never asked his congregation to give conservatively. I mean, he always asked for a liberal offering. You know? And so it all depends on what time it is, what the issue is, as to whether or not one is progressive or conservative. And so I think that you look at John West, who brought me into government. John West, when he got elected governor, 2 days after he got elected, he called my home and asked me for Mrs. P. I called him back. When I called him, we got together and he asked me to join his staff. That was a pretty progressive move. There's no black person ever been on the governor's staff. So I don't know anybody would call John West Southern governor progressive. Who would call Jimmy Carter progressive? So I get a little concerned we categorize people in that sense. That's who and what they are. It all depends on what the time is, what the issue is. That's not too aggressive service. People just hang these things on you. Never saw Bill Clinton aggressive. I never saw him. People saw a lot of things and said he did a lot of progressive things. But Jimmy Carter, young ambassador, that was a pretty progressive move. He did some other things that were pretty progressive, but you couldn't call him progressive. So John West did some great things without the Southern government. Go back to some other governors. I've seen some pretty progressive stuff done by Henry McMaster. He was the governor right now. But he was the first governor to endorse. But when I locked up in that undisclosed location on 6th of January 2021, the very first phone call I got from Henry McMaster. Are you all right? Fine. I'm going to do the State of the Union in a couple of days. I'm going to endorse your broadband bill. Broad, accessible, affordable, broadband for all, $65 billion bill, yours truly bill. Henry McMaster endorsed that bill, went to the legislature 2 days after 2021, January 6th, 2021, asking the South Carolina legislature to endorse it, which it did, and we have now built out 100% in South Carolina. Pretty progressive. You can't call it Henry McMaster. They're progressive.
Keeping with this theme, would you care to reflect in hindsight on the administration of President Joe Biden? President Joe Biden.
My goodness. You know, and I've said this, and if you want to go on the record, check the record. Unless you believe in alternative facts, look at the facts. Actually, no president has ever passed for progressive stuff in my lifetime but Lyndon Johnson. No Democratic my lifetime done without a lot of people argue Franklin Roosevelt. I was born in 1940. That means this year I'm going to turn 87. I don't know. What am I going to be? 86 years old. Well, think about this. Franklin Roosevelt proposed Social Security. It was called greatest anti-poverty legislation. You people realize that Social Security did not apply to 65%. Not allowed to be Social Security. It was set up for people who work if you were not in domestic jobs, agricultural jobs. In an agricultural job or domestic job, you were not allowed to participate in Social Security. 65% of African Americans in this country in those two fields. Not only that, when it was set up, the retirement age set at 65. What was the life expectancy of African Americans in 1935, 59. So it was not ever set up. Not set up for blacks to ever. 65% of blacks never participate. Even those who could participate were not expected to live to benefit from it. So when you look at what I call progressive legislation, in the last century, Lyndon Johnson be number one, and Joe Biden be number two.
Could you remark on any grassroots solutions that you believe are available to prevent new barriers to voting while also still addressing concerns about voter integrity?
Oh, the grassroots is different. That's not going to be the problem. The problem is going to be whether or not we will sit idly by and allow the process to get so frightening that you won't overcome the obstacles. Now, they're going to put up obstacles. Just say that they are talking about. You know, and don't get overwhelmed with the foolishness. The SAVE Act, they will tell you it's all about voter ID. I don't know of a single person who ever voted that did not ID themselves when they went to vote. I keep it in my pocket. My voter registration card is in my pocket. And I present that card every time I go to vote. That's an identification. And even when people talk about a picture ID, when they passed this ID law down in some of the southern states, they determined what IDs would be accepted. I was asked for identification because I was checking the hotel. It wasn't here. I don't remember where I was a couple of weeks ago. And the lady asked me for my ID. I pull out my congressional ID and hand it to her. Let me have your driver's license. I'm sitting there looking at her. Pictures right there. United States Congressman. You see it all on there. She wouldn't accept it. My congressional card. She asked me to give her my driver's license. I just laughed. Give her my driver's license. Well, all over Washington, anybody asked me for the ID, I give them that card. But that lady would not accept it where I was the other night. So what I'm saying is, when they passed these ID laws, they also decided what would be a good ID. And what they did in the southern states, your hunting license was good. Your student activity card, no good. Think about that. These are the little things that you see they will do, and we're going to have to overcome that. Don't get afraid of the process. Do what is necessary to overwhelm the process.
Why do so many Americans in 2024 seemingly vote against their own interest? In particular, people of color, women, and people who are under the poverty line.
I think that what happens is that we measure these kinds of things by the people who show up to vote. Let me say a couple of things here that I think you might find interesting. Bill Clinton got elected in 1992. Bill Clinton got elected. He got nominated. Some of y'all may remember this. There were 9 people running. They were called the 9 dwarfs. That's what they were called, the 9 dwarfs, because nobody wanted to nominate. George H.W. Bush had come out of all of this stuff, Desert Storm, whatever stuff was going on, and he at one point had a 92% favorability. So nobody wanted to take him out. Bill Clinton coming out of little Arkansas, and all of a sudden he gets elected because he had an overwhelming vote in 1992. In 1994, we lost midterm, big time. Why? If you look at the turnout of voters, in 1992, we won. We had the biggest freshman class since World War II. I became president of that freshman class in 1992. In 1994, we had this big drop off. The Republican turnout in 92 and 94 were the same. It was the same. We lost bigly because we dropped off. Same thing happened with Barack Obama. Barack Obama got elected in 2008. Big number. 2010, we lost for 60 seats. Why? The Republican turnout in 2008 and the turnout in 2010 was the same. Ours dropped off. So that's what's happening. It ain't that the people are voting against the census, they ain't showing up to protect it. You got to show up to protect it.
Last two questions. Congressman Khanna, your grandparents spent years in jail fighting for Indian independence. How do you connect these stories of the Black freedom struggle in America to a larger international struggle?
Well, Mr. Clyburn knows the story. My grandfather, Amarnath Vidyalankar, was in jail twice, early 1930s and in the 1940s, fighting for independence from Britain. There's an article today in the New Statesman saying, grandson of Indian freedom fighter challenging British monarchy with the Epstein files. History coming full circle, but that movement inspired Reverend Lawson, inspired Dr. King. Mordecai Johnson, who's the president of Howard University, went to India, came back and gave a lecture in Pennsylvania, where Dr. King was at the Crozer Seminary at that time, and he heard this lecture about Satyagraha, truth force, and adopted a lot of those principles of nonviolence. And then he pushed not just for the Voting Rights Act and not just for the Civil Rights Act, as I mentioned earlier, for the Immigration Reform Act. Before that, about 100 people from India would come to the United States every year because the quotas basically were favoring people of European descent. And it's the Immigration Reform Act that changes the composition of the United States. In fact, when you hear some of the people around Trump talk, they fundamentally believe that was the original sin, that we made this country open to people of all backgrounds, regardless of race and faith. And one of the reasons that Mr. Clyburn and I built a relationship is when I got elected to Congress, I was well aware that when the Indian American community came here, they didn't get jobs at Stanford, let's just be blunt, or Harvard or Yale. You know who hired them? HBCUs. And so I said, okay, now that so many people in the Indian American community are doing well in technology, how do we build partnerships between the tech community and HBCUs? And I worked with Mr. Clyburn and his daughter, Jennifer, and others. And for years, we've been doing that work with some of the tech companies and HBCUs. I don't say this often, but I had my whole pitch ready when Kamala Harris would be president, saying, make me Commerce Secretary and we'll scale this whole thing. But didn't work out. But the point is that I believe that the moral force of the civil rights movement and the independence movement in India, that moral force is consistent also with the deepest moral force of America's founding. And that the opportunity for us in this country is to do something unprecedented, which is to become the world's first cohesive multiracial democracy that then has an America that treats the aspirations and dignity, not just of all Americans, but people around the world with respect. And that is the project that we're working on. I will give Mr. Clyburn the last word, but I want to just say this, the last word for me. We were touring the Martin Luther King Center, and if you haven't seen it, you should definitely go see that center. And there was a picture there of many of the civil rights leaders, and there was a picture there of Dr. King at Stanford, 1967. I say this not to compare Mr. Clyburn to Dr. King. Dr. King is unique, is of course one of the greatest Americans. But I do believe there will be a picture of this event in that center of Mr. Clyburn being here at Stanford. I can't tell you how honored we are to have someone at his age, 86, his background of having gone to jail for the civil rights movement, his leadership of having attained the highest position of any person in civil rights in the Congress, and his moral voice still fighting today. I hope, and of course it's not that he needs book sales at his stature, but I hope people will get the book for two reasons, both watching and here. My day is filled with 2 minutes. My staff will say, you got to do this Instagram video. You got to do this TikTok video. You got to go on MSNBC. You got to do this podcast. And I love doing it all. But we as a society have stopped reading. We've stopped pausing to think, to read, to understand history. We're not going to get to that multiracial democracy vision if we don't understand our history and grapple with it. I want this book to be read by every young person in this country. I want this book to be read by as many people in America so they understand what we've been through and what we need to go through. And I hope all of us here can help that project by getting the book, reading the book, sharing the book. It's really why I invited Mr. Clyburn to come to Stanford. So thank you very much. You really graced us with your presence.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ro. Thanks for your friendship over the years, and thank you so much for our daily interactions. And I was only half joking. He mentioned my daughter, Jennifer, but Jennifer and Angela, my two youngest, all my daughters are north of 50. So I don't have any young daughters. But they both steeped in education, and they interact a whole lot with Ro, and much of the work he's doing. They help HBCUs in South Carolina and other places in the country. I hope not as much as South Carolina, but thank him for that. And I thank all of you for being here. I do believe we are at a significant juncture in the development of this great country. Don't need to be made great. We are great. We've just got to see how to make those greatnesses successful for all that our children live great country. Don't do that. Fear. Children and grandchildren will not get back this.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have books outside for purchase, and if you'd like to have your book signed, Congressman Clyburn will be here in this room signing books. Thank you again for coming out.